You know, when you put on a tender acoustic love ballad, there's a very specific feeling you're expecting from it.
Oh, yeah, definitely. You were looking for comfort.
Right. You want something that feels like, I don't know, a warm blanket on a cold night. The singer leans in impossibly close to the microphone, calls you baby,
And they promise to shield you from the harsh realities of the world. It's a very trusting space.
Exactly. It is this deeply intimate musical space. But then you cue up Elliott Smith's Between the Bars, and almost immediately, that warm blanket starts to feel a lot more like a straitjacket.
Yeah, it really does.
Because the chilling paradox at the heart of this track is that, well, it isn't a love song at all. What masquerades as this gentle, devoted partner is actually the personified, predatory voice of alcohol.
It is just a brilliant piece of misdirection. You know, you really think you are listening to a lover, but you are actually listening to a substance.
And the way the substance weaponizes that romantic intimacy is just, it is terrifying once you notice it.
Oh, absolutely.
It uses terms of endearment like baby, but not out of affection. It uses it to infantilize the listener. It is asserting this absolute paternalistic control.
It is offering a Faustian bargain, really, this state of seductive paralysis.
Right. It whispers that it will protect you from failure, but the hidden cost is that you have to surrender your entire future to it. Welcome to Deep Cuts and Deep Thinking. Today, we welcome you to this deep dive into Elliott Smith's seminal 1997 track, Between the Bars.
We have a massive stack of sources in front of us today.
We really do. From dense musicological analyses to archival studio documents and cultural retrospectives.
And our mission today is to unpack exactly how this seemingly simple acoustic track acts as a masterful, multi-layered trap of existential dread.
And musical genius. So to truly grasp the deceptive intimacy of this trap, we kind of have to examine the physical environment where Smith actually constructed it, right?
We do, because there is a deeply ingrained myth in indie music culture about this song.
Oh, the lo-fi myth.
Exactly. People think this song and much of his early work was simply a raw, unedited diary entry.
Right. The lore always suggests he just, sat in front of a single microphone on a sad afternoon and poured his heart out onto the tape.
Right, but that's just not true.
People always romanticize this era of his music as being completely unvarnished and spontaneous. So let's set the actual scene for you.
Please do.
We are in Portland, Oregon in the mid to late 1990s, and Elliott Smith is going through a massive transitional phase.
He was actively negotiating his departure from his band, Heat Miser.
Yeah, which was known for this loud, aggressive, kind of grunge-adjacent alternative rock.
Very different sound.
Totally. He wants to move away from that high-volume, democratic band format toward highly intimate, solitary work.
And that transition required a completely different physical space. The album Either Or wasn't recorded in a shiny, sterile corporate studio with, soundproof booths.
No, the physical tracking of Between the Bars happened in a decentralized domestic space.
Specifically, it was primarily tracked in the basement of a rented shared house on Northeast 16th Avenue in Portland.
Just a guy in a basement with a half-inch Tascam 38 8-track open-reel tape machine.
Which sounds incredibly simple.
It does, but here is where the session documentarians, including his archivist Larry Crane, totally debunk that single-take folklore.
Right, because the foundation of the master track is indeed a continuous live performance.
The acoustic rhythm and the primary lead vocal, right?
Yes, done simultaneously. But the final track you hear on the album is meticulously layered.
It's not just one guy and one guitar.
No, it features two very deliberate, subtle acoustic guitar melody overdubs in the second verse.
And the vocals are where the trap really starts to close in around you.
Absolutely.
He recorded a double-tracked lead vocal. But wait, I have to stop and ask something here because this has always confused me.
Go for it.
If I am trying to make a song sound incredibly intimate, raw, and vulnerable, why in the world would I record two separate versions of my voice on top of each other?
It seems counterintuitive.
It does. Doesn't vocal doubling usually make a song sound massive and artificial, like, I don't know, a giant stadium rock anthem?
That is usually the exact case, yeah. But Smith used a very specific technique to achieve the opposite effect.
How so?
He recorded a second vocal pass that mirrored the pitch, the phrasing, and the breath control of his original live take with almost terrifying precision.
Wow.
And then he panned them close together in the stereo field.
So no computerized effects?
None. He didn't use a digital chorus effect or a vocal thickener. He relied entirely on the micromilliseconds of human variation between those two identical takes.
To create what audio engineers call a phase-shifted acoustic space.
Exactly.
Okay, can you break that down for someone listening who has never touched a mixing board? What does a phase-shifted acoustic space actually feel like?
Well, if you put on a pair of good headphones and listen to this track, the voice doesn't sound like it is coming from a stage in front of you.
Right, it feels closer.
Much closer. Because of how those two nearly identical vocal tracks interact, and because the microphones were positioned so closely to his mouth, it creates this three-dimensional, deeply claustrophobic environment.
You hear the dry intake of breath.
Yes, and you hear the sharp sibilance of the consonants.
It genuinely sounds like a ghost whispering directly inside your skull.
It flawlessly mirrors the internal, private, inescapable voice of addiction.
It's an illusion of raw intimacy, but it's engineered through absolute precision. And while that core was tracked in a Portland basement, the transition to high fidelity is what gave the track its final, devastating polish.
Right, because he didn't mix it in that basement.
No, Smith literally packed up his multi-track tapes, put them in his car, and drove down to California to a converted dairy barn called The Shop.
Great studio.
Yeah, and there, producers Tom Rothrock and Rob Schnaff transferred those skeletal 8-track recordings to a Stevens 16-track machine for the final mix.
Which is crucial because it allowed them to preserve that basement intimacy while giving it the sonic clarity to stand alongside major label releases.
I love how this totally shatters the lo-fi label people slap on this song. Like, this isn't a hastily scribbled note on a napkin.
Not at all.
I like to think of it more like a ship in a bottle.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, when you look at it from the outside, it looks impossibly fragile, raw, and organic. But it actually took painstaking, meticulous labor using tiny tools through a narrow glass neck to fit all those pieces perfectly together inside.
That is a phenomenal visual, because the physical intimacy achieved in that basement recording is mathematically matched by the literal physics of Smith's instrument.
The guitar itself.
Yes, he literally lowered the tension of his guitar to pull the listener under.
The tuning. This is where the structural genius gets so fascinating to me.
It's brilliant.
If you look up the guitar chords online to try and learn this song, the tabs almost always show standard A minor chord shapes.
Right.
But if you pick up a standard tuned guitar and try to play along with the record, you will sound completely wrong. It will clash horribly.
That's because Smith tuned his entire guitar down a full step to D standard.
So when his hands form what looks like a traditional A minor shape on the fretboard,
The song actually sounds in G minor.
for the non-musicians listening, why bother doing that? Like, why not just play standard shapes in a standard tuning?
Well, it all comes down to physics and string tension.
Okay.
By tuning the entire instrument down a full step, you decrease the physical tension on the guitar strings by approximately 20%.
And this profoundly alters the timbre, or the tone color, of the acoustic guitar. It removes those bright, piercing high notes, what audio engineers call trebly transients.
And it opens up a much darker, warmer, low-end resonance.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Because the strings are literally looser on the fretboard.
Because of that 20% drop in tension, the strings have more slack.
Right. It gives the entire track this heavy, somber, weighted feeling.
And then the rhythm adds another layer of deception.
Because it's structured as a waltz.
Exactly. It is in 3/4 time, hovering around 138 beats per minute. But it doesn't feel like a rigid ballroom waltz, you know?
No, because he deliberately avoids strict classical finger-picking arpeggio.
Instead, he uses this hybrid fingerstyle pattern. His thumb drives a continuous, steady quarter note bass line, while his index and middle fingers brush the treble strings with a loose, percussive movement.
It keeps the momentum constantly moving forward, swaying in that 3/4 time.
It feels like you're being gently rocked to sleep.
But underneath that swaying, comforting rhythm, Smith introduces a terrifying harmonic trap.
The harmonic centerpiece of the song is the chorus. This is where the trap physically closes.
Okay, let's dig into that.
In the chorus, Smith introduces a borrowed minor chord from a parallel key, which creates a striking descending chromatic bass line.
Hold on, let's pause there for a quick jargon check.
No.
What exactly is a descending chromatic bass line, and how does it make the listener feel?
Sure, so a chromatic scale means moving by half steps.
Like on a piano.
Exactly. Imagine sitting at a piano and playing every single adjacent key white, black, moving downward one by one.
Right.
In the chorus of Between the Bars, the lowest note, the bass note, slides down one half step at a time underneath the melody.
So the foundation of the song is literally sinking beneath the singer.
Yes, it physically mimics a downward spiral. The vocal melody is gliding smoothly over this complex, shifting, falling harmonic underbelly.
It creates a subconscious feeling of continuous, inevitable descent.
The gravity just keeps pulling you down, but the waltz rhythm makes the fall feel gentle.
And then we reach the ultimate structural trick, the very end of the song.
Right. The first time through the chorus, that descending bass line sequence resolves safely back to the tonic chord, back to G minor to start the next verse.
It feels resolved, like you're returning home.
But at the very end of the track, instead of resolving back home to the tonic, the song ends abruptly on a minor subdominant chord.
F minor.
F minor, exactly. And it just rings out into silence.
Ending on an unresolved minor chord is like it's like a movie cutting to black right before the hero lands their jump.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
It denies you closure. It leaves you suspended in musical limbo. You are quite literally left hanging between the bars.
And that feeling of being suspended in musical limbo is not just a clever audio trick.
No, it connects to something much bigger.
It perfectly mirrors the philosophical engine driving the entire album. Because the trap Smith is exploring isn't merely about the mechanics of alcohol addiction.
Right.
It's about the terrifying, existential burden of choosing who you are.
We really have to zoom out to the album title to understand this. The album is called Either Or.
Which is a direct homage to the Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard.
Right, because his 1843 treatise is also titled Either Or.
Exactly. And in it, he outlines a dialectical tension between two primary modes of human existence. You have the aesthetic life and the ethical life.
How does Kierkegaard define the aesthetic life?
The aesthetic life is entirely defined by the pursuit of immediate sensory pleasure, emotional intensity, and a desperate, frantic desire to escape boredom.
Like avoiding commitment at all costs.
Absolutely. An aesthete just wants to keep rotating their pleasures, moving from one distraction to another, to stay stimulated.
And the ethical life.
The ethical life, on the other hand, is about duty. It is about making conscious, sometimes difficult choices, taking responsibility, and achieving authentic self-actualization.
So to put this in modern terms for you listening, the aesthetic life is basically doom scrolling on your phone for 3 hours to avoid the anxiety of actually starting a difficult project or having a hard conversation.
That is a phenomenal modern parallel. because the ethical stage demands action, and action inherently brings the anxiety of potential failure.
So the aesthete refuses to choose.
They keep scrolling, or in the case of this song, they keep drinking.
But Kierkegaard's tragic paradox is that this refusal to choose, this endless chasing of comfortable spaces, inevitably leads to ultimate despair.
You slowly destroy your selfhood by refusing to commit to building it.
And between the bars is this haunting portrait of that aesthetic stage in its darkest, most destructive form.
Yeah, the narrator, the bottle, is offering the listener total escape from the anxiety of choice.
Do what I say and I'll make you okay.
Right. By surrendering your agency to the substance, you are relieved of the burden of making decisions.
The doom scroll never has to end.
But the result is total stagnation. You are, as the lyrics of another famous Elliott Smith track say, running speed trials, standing in place.
Which brings us to the sheer brilliance of the title itself. Between the bars is a triple-layered pun that captures this Kierkegaardian paralysis from 3 different angles.
The wordplay is just incredible.
Let's look at those layers, because this really blew my mind when I read the source material. First, you have the spatial or social layer.
Bar hopping.
Yeah, moving from one tavern to another late at night, practicing the aesthete's rotation method, shifting environments to outrun your existential dread.
Second, you have the carceral layer, prison cells, the psychological cage of addiction and mental illness.
Kissing through the bars of a self-imposed prison that you built to keep the world out.
And third, the musicological layer.
The literal measures of a song.
The structural boundaries of the sheet music itself. The addict is finding solace in the silence between the beats, trapped within the structure of the song.
Smith forces you to inhabit all of those meanings simultaneously.
It's masterful.
I do have a question about the psychology of the lyrics here, though.
Sure.
If the narrator is alcohol, the cage, the ultimate aesthetic trap, why does it sound so desperately protective?
What do you mean?
Well, there is a lyric where the bottle promises to keep them still, referring to the people you've been before. What is actually going on there?
Oh, well, if we connect this to the broader landscape of human psychology and trauma, those people you've been before that you don't want around anymore, they represent past identities.
Like failed versions of yourself.
Failed versions, or highly intrusive traumatic memories that are haunting the addict. These internal ghosts constantly push and shove in the theater of the mind, demanding a reckoning.
And facing them would require entering Kierkegaard's ethical stage. It would require doing the hard work.
Exactly. So the bottle offers the ultimate suffocating protection. Total sedation.
Right.
By silencing the critical historical self, the substance isolates the subject in an eternal numb present. It protects you by erasing you.
It is a suffocating embrace.
Yeah.
And this deeply internal, claustrophobic portrait of self-sabotage was so universally understood that it inevitably broke out of the indie underground.
It resonated with so many people.
It did. It found a massive mainstream audience, primarily through cinema.
The cultural trajectory of the entire song and Smith's career completely shifted in 1997 when director Gus Van Sant integrated it into his film Good Will Hunting.
It is the absolute perfect cinematic pairing.
It really is.
Think about Matt Damon's character, Will Hunting. He is a genius suffering from profound attachment trauma. He uses his working class neighborhood, his brawling, and his heavy drinking as defense mechanisms to avoid the vulnerability of his own potential. The song flawlessly scores his psychological state.
And the film actually includes 2 distinct versions of the song. You have the original acoustic track from the Portland basement, and then you have an emergency collaboration featuring a lush string arrangement by legendary composer Danny Elfman.
Wait, what do you mean by an emergency collaboration?
Well, during rehearsals for the Academy Awards, another arranger had prepared this bombastic, highly traditional, over-orchestrated version of Smith's music. It completely threatened to crush the fragile, phase-shifted beauty of his style under the weight of a Hollywood orchestra.
That would have ruined it.
Danny Elfman actually stepped in at the last minute to create a simple, elegant string arrangement for the cinematic misses that deliberately stayed out of the way of Smith's intimate vocal delivery.
The irony of this is just incredible to me. A song explicitly about squandering your potential, hiding from the world, and trapping yourself in a basement is the exact piece of music that catapulted Smith out of his basement and onto the global stage of the Academy Awards.
It is a profound irony. And the sheer durability of that original composition is proven by how many different ways it has been covered and reinterpreted over the decades.
Each cover seems to shift the psychological tension of the trap in a new way.
Definitely. For instance, in 2004, Madeleine recorded a version that turned it into a smoky 1930s jazz ballad.
Oh, I've heard that one. She utilized an upright bass and very soft-brushed percussion, right?
Yes, and her elegant, sophisticated production actually masks the horror of the lyrics. It sounds like a romantic supper club confession.
But that heightens the tension because it shows the listener exactly how easily the seductive promises of addiction can be romanticized. Like, it sounds luxurious.
Yeah, it does. Then you have Chris Garneau's chamber pop version, which was heavily featured in Pedro Almodóvar's film La piel que habito.
He went the complete opposite direction with it.
He stripped away all the warmth of the acoustic guitar. He turned the lyrics "Keep You Still and Make You Mine" into a literal, predatory threat of physical captivity.
And conversely, Emily Haines of the band Metric performed clear, acoustic live covers that lacked the hushed, compressed, phase-shifted vocal of the original.
Right. By presenting the lyrics clearly and loudly from an external perspective, she shifted the track from an internal monologue into an externalized confrontation against those seductive traps.
And today, Like in the digital streaming era, the track remains Smith's most popular by a massive margin.
The numbers are staggering.
It surpassed 100 million Spotify streams back in May 2021, and it sits at over 266 million today. It is averaging over 60,000 daily streams around the world.
This data raises a vital point about his legacy, though, because following his tragic passing in 2003, a very reductive narrative crystallized around Smith in the media.
He was painted as the ultimate sad sack or the doomed troubadour.
Exactly. People treated his music as just an unedited audio diary of his suffering.
Which completely diminishes his genius.
It really does.
Everything we have explored in this deep dive today, the audio engineering, the music theory, the philosophy, it proves that narrative is completely false.
It defeats that tragic artist mythos entirely. Elliott Smith wasn't just pouring his diary onto a tape machine. He was a meticulous, deeply trained craftsman and a brilliant philosopher.
The deliberate use of D-standard tuning to lower the physical tension.
The sophisticated voice leading of the descending chromatic bass line.
The triple entendres, the Kierkegaardian framework. I mean, he built a structurally perfect, highly controlled monument out of his own existential dread.
He didn't just suffer. He engineered a masterpiece out of it. And before we go today, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over. We have spent the last few minutes talking a lot about the iron bars of addiction, the musical bars of the acoustic measure, and the physical bars of a prison.
Right.
But I want you to consider the bars in your own life. Are the things that comfort you the most? A daily habit, a rigid routine, a comfortable but stagnant relationship, a refusal to take a risk? Are those actually the very things keeping you isolated?
That's a heavy question.
Are your comforts preventing you from taking the leap and choosing your true self? The next time you find yourself seeking out a safe harbor to avoid a challenge, ask yourself, who is really doing the seducing?
If you liked this episode, please support the show by liking and subscribing.